to my lifters and listeners. Welcome back to the Lift Her Up podcast. If it's your first time, then welcome. I am your host, Latrice. Here we talk about all things faith and a little bit of lifestyle. Listen, guys, I took a little rest last week and it was definitely needed. If you see the channel and you've been listening this year, then you know I have had some amazing interviews each month, and I have another one coming up for the month of April. But my team, we just decided that we deserved a little week off. So I hope that you all have been enjoying this season thus far as we have been tackling confidence and courage. And I hope that you go back and re-listen to the great interviews that I've had, the great stories and testimonies of some amazing people in my life. And there is a lot more to come this year. I promise. I promise. But yeah, last week we just decided that a break was needed. There has been a lot of transition going on in my life personally. God has been doing some amazing things. And if I'm honest, I have been in a place of interesting warfare with every transition. There's always this warfare that's attached to it for me, just in my body, just feeling fatigued, in my mind mostly. Um, just a feeling of not being able to conquer that the enemy really tries to play with my mind, and all new responsibilities, well, new and old responsibilities. I was just struggling with feeling very overwhelmed in the last few weeks. And when you just have so much going on, sometimes you just get hit in the face like at a certain point, and you're forced to sit with God and face yourself and be transparent about what's really going on in the season. And if, like I said, if I'm honest, I was feeling overwhelmed and I was feeling overlooked at the same time. And I don't know about y'all, but it's been a crazy past few weeks. But I'm here. I'm back. We are back on our regularly scheduled program. And I really wanted to talk about this season that I feel a lot of us are in when we're feeling a bit overwhelmed, when we're feeling a bit overlooked, but we feel as though we're also doing everything we know to do, when we are serving God faithfully, but we might not see the reward immediately, or the outcome that we've been promised. We don't see it immediately. And a lot of us are feeling stagnant in the place that we're in. And the Lord, honestly, He changed my topic for today. So I just came up with this. He just gave me these things over the last 2 days because it was going to be something completely different, but I'll save that for another episode. But a lot of us are in a place where we're just not quite satisfied with where we are. And I can attest to this myself. Like I said, the Lord has been doing amazing things just in the first quarter of the year alone, like January through March. He has exceeded my expectations, honestly, like literally Ephesians 3:20, exceedingly abundantly, above above what I even imagined. And that is crazy because how can the Lord be exceeding my expectations, yet I still feel at times overlooked by Him? And I think a lot of us are in that area of just being like, I know that this isn't it. And I think that's where a lot of us get stuck on the level that we are, because we know that there's more, but we might not yet be willing to do what's required for more, or we don't think that it's ours to take, or we get stuck in places of complacency where we just kind of just ride on the level that we're on, and God really wants to break us out of that. So what happens when what God said to us, what He told us and what He's shown us does not equate to where we are presently, does not equate to what we see? And God told me that if you don't see what He said, then that means more is in store. So at a certain point, we should get tired of plateauing in God. We should get tired of being at a plateau in the places that He's called us. Because once we reach that, that means it's time for us to ascend again. Because God has more in store for us. He has more blessings in store for us. He has limitless blessings, honestly. But a lot of times our beliefs can filter those blessings. So either our state of belief can come in waves, in floods, or it can leave us in a place where we only experience the blessings of God in trickles. And some of us just get caught on the trickles that God gives us, and we're like, oh, this is great, this is nice. And we kind of just stay there, not realizing that there's a whole flood. There are like waves of blessings that God can give us. And again, a lot of us stay in that place because we don't believe that the floods of blessings can be ours, and we stay in trickle-sized faith. Um, and the Lord does not want us to get trapped in these areas. He wants us to rise to the occasion. He wants us to continue to pursue and grow more in Him, to go deeper, to elevate in Him. But that requires some work. It requires some work. Some of us don't want to do that work, though, and the Lord has been highlighting that to me a lot. Like, am I willing to do the things that are required to get what He has in store for me, to get the most that He has in store for me? Or am I going to just sit on this level and become complacent where I am and not be willing to at least try? And a lot of us have given up. Like, we just stopped trying. Like the enemy has fought us so hard, has fought our flesh so hard, has fought our mind so hard, to where we've just given up. Like, we've just laid down and we just allowed him to beat us up continually. And like I said, this message is for me too, but time's up for us to just allow the enemy to continue to steal from us and to take from us. God is not going to infringe upon our free will. He's not going to force us into something, to force us to go beyond what we're ready for or what we're willing to do. He's not going to infringe upon those things. So there has to be something in us that gives us the courage and the strength to pursue on and to continue to fight for what is rightfully ours. And I have been reading the book of Genesis. Like, the Lord has had me in Genesis for a while, like all this year pretty much. And the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Joseph, Noah, they've really been giving me a new sense of life. Just encouraging me in different ways that they hadn't before. Because, you can read the Bible, you can read a story, and then come back a little while later and get a completely new revelation as you grow in God more, and as He gives you new revelation, and as you get new tools to study His word and rightly divide the word, right? So I've been reading in Genesis for months now. And I currently have been in Jacob's story. So for Jacob, just to give a background for people who don't know, Jacob had been working for Laban, his father-in-law, for about 20 years, a little over 20 years. And he was consistently being deceived by Laban, okay? Laban kept changing up the terms and conditions of Jacob's service time to him, of his servitude time to him. And ultimately, Laban wanted to keep Jacob around because he recognized and knew Jacob being there in his vicinity, in his community, was giving him favor. But once Jacob realized that Laban and his sons had then turned on him, so the favor that he once saw in Jacob, he became jealous. Laban became jealous, him and his sons. So once Jacob realized that God told him to return back home to his land, he reminded him of the promise that he made to his ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, his father. And it's interesting because I'm sure Jacob didn't forget about God's promise. Ultimately, I don't think he forgot over all that time, but I do think there were probably times where he felt like his work could never lead to him getting to that promise. Just like we work again faithfully, we serve faithfully, and sometimes we don't see that end result because we're just working so much. So there's probably times where Jacob felt discouraged in the place that he was working, and feeling like his servitude was for naught. Feeling like he may never be allowed to witness the promise of God. And then I'm sure there are other times where the promise kept him working, like his faith was showing through his work, where he was like, I do know that I'll see that someday. So again, those aren't things in the text specifically, but just from being in my experience, and you could probably identify it with it as well. But when you're working so hard towards an end goal, you can get lost and confused sometimes, because it's like, okay, Lord, like this ain't happening. They told me something and now that time is up. So is that really going to happen for me or not? It can dampen your view of God and what he's doing, and it can cause you to think that the promise has changed for you, or it's no longer going to come to pass. Like God has changed his mind about you, when ultimately he hasn't. So I wanted to read a bit of the text because it's Genesis 31. I'm coming from Genesis 31, chapter 31 and chapter 32. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just bits and pieces that the Lord wanted me to share with you guys, insight that he had brought to me. So Genesis 31 and 10 through 13. So in the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and molted. Then the angel of the Lord said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and molted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. So again, this is God telling Jacob to go back to the land that his ancestors were promised, right? And what stood out to me is when the Lord said, I have seen all that Laban has done to you. And when I read that, he said, make this personal. Make this personal to you. And I was like, oh, okay. So now I'm about to make it personal for us, okay? I have seen all that your boss has done to you. I have seen all that your family has done to you. I have seen all that the enemy has done to you. This served as a reminder to Jacob that nothing goes unnoticed by God and that he sees all. So ultimately, this was a dream that the Lord had given Jacob. And brief background, what the Lord was talking about with the flocks being striped and spotted. He was saying that it was him, the Lord, making it so the livestock was showing traits that Laban had tricked Jacob about. So Laban would make a statute, would change the limitations, whatever, and he would be like, okay, well, the striped ones are yours. Well, the spotted ones are yours. And so God was showing Jacob in the dream, like, I'm the one that made it so when Laban said the striped ones were yours, I made them striped. When Laban said the spotted ones were yours, I made them spotted. Like, he's the God of the genes, so he was making it so that Jacob actually profited and was wealthy from working for Laban. So he was giving Jacob wealth while he was taking it from Laban. Again, he sees all and he notices all. So even in the midst of Jacob being in an unfavorable situation, being in an unfair situation, God made it right. God made it so he prospered in the time where he felt that he was probably working for naught, And since God sees all, that should immediately deflate all of our thoughts and feelings of being overlooked, because he doesn't waste anything. He doesn't not use anything for our good. So again, even while Jacob was being deceived, God was making it work for his favor, taking treasures, taking livestock and wealth from Laban and giving it back to Jacob. God told Jacob to go back home, right? We read that in the text. Even though God knew that Jacob would face possible opposition with Laban and also with his brother Esau. So God led him to go back. And he knew that he was going to face opposition. And that's always been a question of mine, like, God, why would you allow that? Like, why would you do that? And it's because sometimes when we follow God, we are going to encounter opposition. I don't know why we think that just because we roll on with Jesus, that we're not going to face opposition, that we're not going to have to turn up and fight sometimes, that we're not going to have to face some tough stuff, because we are actually even more so, probably even more so. So that's just to say, every pushback you feel is not going to be the enemy. Sometimes it's God testing you along the way to make sure you can actively go into your next place and not ruin it. And then sometimes the opposition you feel, that pushback, is a result, it's a consequence of something that you've done. So Jacob with Esau, Jacob was feeling fear about encountering his brother again, because he knew in a previous season, years ago, last time he saw Esau was trying to kill him. Okay, he was trying to get at him because Jacob had deceived him. So those were repercussions that Jacob had to face. Every time you sow, you are going to have to make amends. You have to eat those seeds. You have to eat the fruit of every seed that you've sown, whether it's good or whether it's bad. But I believe that in that time, while Jacob was working, that God was working on him too. So in the text, it says that Jacob, he tries to make amends with his brother by giving him portions of the livestock that he's earned. And different commentators will say that, oh, like he was still being a trickster in that time, because he was trying to like soften his brother up pretty much. And you know, that could be true for sure. So did Jacob still have his trickster ways? Yeah, probably. Like the same way when any of us get saved, that sanctification don't happen immediately. You know, like you still got that, okay, like you still got that sometimes, like that Saul in you that's still a little gut, a little ratchet, a little rough around the edges, whatever. Those things don't necessarily go away when we get saved and we start following God. It's just that God starts to use it for a different purpose. But we have to fight our flesh every day to keep that old man at bay. So yeah, he had to make amends with his brother and give away a portion of his livestock. Again, eating those seeds, that fruit that he had sown in the past. But that working for over 20 years for Laban, I'm sure bred some sort of humility in him, the same way that it does all of us. That God was shaping his character so he could become the blessed person that we now know Jacob was, right? So fast forward to Genesis 32. And we see in verses 25 through 28, while Jacob is preparing to meet his brother, he has an encounter with the Lord. Verse 25, when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day has broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go until you bless me. And he said, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. So Jacob literally wrestled with God, and he wouldn't let him go until God blessed him. And this is so important to the overarching topic that I'm talking about: the fight, the wrestle, the going beyond where you are, the tussle that we feel, the tension that we feel between our now space and our God space. Like, it requires a fight, it requires a wrestle, and a lot of us aren't willing to do that. But I feel like, as I was reading the text, I'm like, Jacob must have known that the wrestle was going to be worth it if he was willing to not let God go. You know, the scripture says that they were wrestling all night. Day broke. Like, the Lord was like, loose me. And Jacob was like, nah, not until you bless me. Not until you bless me. So the things that God had for him, the ultimate blessing that God had for him, it came after he wrestled with people and with God. The name change happened after the wrestling. The nation of Israel happened after the wrestling. And that goes to show that we have to encounter a fight and a wrestle in order to get ultimately what God has in store for us, to get the more. And I believe Jacob knew that there was more in store for him, and he knew that he couldn't do it without God. He knew that God ultimately had to be the one to give it to him. So he didn't let go. He didn't let go until God gave him the blessing to open up the flood of blessings that would result from his life and those who went after him and his whole family. So Jacob knew that God could give him more, and he wasn't just satisfied to stay where he was, even though God had given him more in these unfavorable situations, right? Like, God had granted him wealth in the face of his enemies. Jacob knew that that wasn't it. He knew that there was more to be had, and he had the courage to wrestle with God despite that. You know, like, he had the courage to be like, hey, like, I know there's more. I know that you can give me more, and I'm willing to wrestle with you for it. So in this season, I want to encourage us to no longer be restless. I want to encourage us to stop allowing fear to dampen our spirits and to keep our souls in bondage, in a sense, and making us believe that we have to stay in this place that we're in, and that God is not going to provide for us while we are in this temporary space. God wants us to wrestle with him for some things. And when you are pursuing the things of God, it's just going to happen. Like, don't allow your fatigue and your strife to prevent you from pursuing those things. That's where a lot of us labor. Literally, that's where a lot of us stay. And we have to keep pushing. Even when it's uncomfortable, we have to keep pushing. Don't let the enemy continue to beat you up. Again, I'm speaking to myself about this. We have to stop complaining about where we are instead of actually going after where God wants us to be. When we're not willing to go the distance, when we're not willing to do the things that he requires of us, we got to stop complaining about being where we are, because obviously you like it, okay? Like, obviously you like it if you're not willing to do what it takes to get to the next level. So we have to stop doing that. If we're not willing to be uncomfortable for a moment or for a season to get to better, then just knock it off. Just knock it off. Just say you don't want to be blessed, because obviously to be blessed means to be broken. To be blessed means to be broken. So if you're not willing to wrestle, if you're not willing to fight and to be broken in the place that you are, then you're not ready for elevation. And you need to be honest with yourself and say that, Lord, I might not be as ready as I think I am. I've had to have this conversation with the Lord myself. I'm like, am I the person I need to be in order to reach that next level? Am I the person that God wants me to be to receive all these blessings? And sometimes the answer is no. The answer is no, because there are things that the Lord is still having to work out of me. There's still certain mindsets that he's having to purge me from And the same thing is true for all of us. But that promise is what keeps me going. That future that the Lord promised me is what keeps me going. The purpose over my life is what keeps me going. And I pray that it's the same for you. Wrestling is worth it. The future that God has promised you, that wrestling is worth it. How I know it's worth it and how you know it's worth it, how we can know, is because both God and the devil try to wrestle us for it on either side. Obviously, God wrestles us to improve us and to better us and to grow us and to bless us. But the enemy also wrestles with us to keep us stagnated, to destroy us. He hopes to destroy us. So when you have both God and the enemy wanting to wrestle you for your future, wanting to wrestle you for your soul, that must mean that it's important. That means it's important. So we can't allow the fear of wrestling, of being uncomfortable in this season to keep us boggled down. We have to muster up our own courage within ourselves to want to just fight the fight. So I'm praying for our courage in this season, that we're able to tackle the things that God has for us, that He has promised us, that we're able to do something uncommon to get an uncommon blessing. Do something that we've never done before in order to get the floods of blessings that God has for us, because that's what He wants to give us. But our belief has to match what we're doing. Like they work in tandem. That's where faith comes in. That's where our faith comes in, when our belief and our work start to match, because I can't just believe God can do something big in my life and then still work on a small level. I can't believe for a flood-sized blessing, but have like trickle-sized belief and faith. And yes, the faith the size of a mustard seed can get things through. But when you start to become more mature in your walk with Christ, your faith should build on itself. So faith inspires more faith. So if you saw Him do it in a previous season for you, if you see Him working in the lives of your community, your friends, your family, those around you, then that should inspire your own faith. There comes a time where our faith has to grow up. It has to grow up. And that's where the Lord wants us in this season. He wants our faith to grow. So that means our wrestle has to be even bigger and even larger than before. The wrestle is worth it. That's what I want you to know. And we just have to have courage to fight. We have to have courage to wrestle and to dig ourselves out of these stagnant seasons. The Lord has never overlooked us. He is always right beside us, working with us, defending us, going before us, all the things, you guys. So I pray that shed some light for you for this season that you may be in. And if this might resonate with a friend that you know, go ahead and share it with them. Encourage somebody to keep fighting. Encourage somebody to keep on, to wrestle, because the wrestle is going to lead to a blessing ultimately. Share this with a friend. Y'all make sure you continue to like, share, and subscribe. And do me a favor. Let's get these podcast ratings up, okay? Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave a 5-star review if you can. That'd be greatly appreciated. And until next time, you guys remember to stay encouraged. Bye.